Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to MDC Connects 2021. I'm Sarah Brockbank. I'm a lead scientist at Medicines Discovery Catapult, and I'm hosting this session today with my colleague Darren Holmes. This is a series of weekly webinars that's going to run over the next few weeks, and it will be on a Tuesday at 2 o'clock. So last year we ran a series of informative drug discovery webinars as part of our MDC Connect series. And this year we're going to focus right in on complex medicines. We acknowledge that the medicines industry is mainly small molecule at the minute, but there's been a period of change towards stratified, more complex medicines. And with this, there's more challenging discovery and development needs. So in this series of webinars, we're going to explore the opportunities and the challenges that are presented by this new class of medicines. And we're going to be guided through the steps from concept through to the clinic. And we're going to hear from the pioneers that are developing the medicines, and also we're going to hear from the experts that are out in the community that are available to support them. So this is the first of this series. And in this session, we're going to think about what is a complex med, why do we need complex medicines, and we're also going to have a think about we're going to introduce anyway, the opportunities and challenges that we'll talk about in more detail through the rest of this series. So I'm joined by three speakers. Dave Cook, who's the CSO at Blueberry Therapeutics, is going to tell us what is a complex meds, why we need them, and what's the commercial opportunity. And then Duggu Yilmaz, who's a senior scientist here at the Medicines Discovery Catapult, and she's going to talk about the advances in molecular biology and delivery technologies and how that offers us solutions. And finally, Peter Simpson, who's the CSO at Medicines Discovery Catapult, is going to talk about the current state of R&D in complex meds in the UK and what we need to do to shape up to be an international leader. We're going to take questions at the end of each of the talks. So if you'd like to ask a question, please put it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Don't put it in the chat box, please. We're just looking in the Q&A box. So over to you, Dave. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm just getting my slides set up here. Hopefully you can see those. Can you see that, Sarah? Just thumbs up, nod if you can. Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks to the MDC for the opportunity to contribute to this series. As Sarah said, my name's David Cook. I'm the CSO here at Blueberry Therapeutics. We're a dermatology company, and we are actually developing complex medicines for common dermatological indications. So what I'm going to focus on today is really thinking about the commercial opportunity that complex medicines offer, which is a bit of an odd one in a way, because I'm going to give you the spoiler alert here of what the conclusion is. The conclusion is that you need to understand your commercial opportunity. So it's a little bit circular, but in doing that, I'm going to walk you through definition of complex medicine and explain some of the pitfalls actually that I think are out there when you're thinking about complex meds from a commercial perspective. So what are complex medicines? I'm using the FDA categories of complex medicines. I think Peter may come on to a more finer definition of these, but essentially, and I'm not going to walk you through all of these, a complex medicine can be thought of almost anything that doesn't fit into the idea of a traditional drug form, i.e. a small molecule, chemical, active pharmaceutical ingredient in some kind of matrix, be it a pill or a solution for IV or application. But really, it kind of breaks into three pieces. So it's complex from the point of view of what's in the medicine. It's complex from the point of view of how you formulate the medicine, or it's complex from the point of view of how you deliver the medicine. Those are the kind of the three broad churches that complex meds fall into. And of course, the thing about complex solutions is that they can be extremely exciting. And there's a lot of really good science going on in thinking about how a complex medicine in those three areas might be useful. And I think in the COVID pandemic, of course, we've got a great example in things like the vaccines of complex medicines that are really great solutions to problems. But in being an innovator in the complex medicines area, you have to remember, though, that sometimes simple can be best. And that's because, exciting as they are, a complex medicine can make your life extremely difficult. And that's because it requires, from a research and development perspective, specialist equipment and specific expertise. There's a major burden in pharmaceutical development and manufacturing, in our own experience, for example, using novel excipients. These might require their own safety assessment. They might get the attention of the regulators. They might be novel excipients and unproven from a regulatory perspective. They could be combination products. So if you had, for example, a device with your medicine and the device was improving the delivery of your medicine, be it something like an insulin pump or an inhaler, that's a combination product that introduces new levels of complexity in terms of manufacturing. A scale up can be a challenge, moving from making liposomes on small scale to making liposomes at scale could offer all sorts of challenges to you. And part of those challenges is also how you do your quality assurance, your quality control. How do you ensure the specifications of your complex medicine, be it because it is complex, are actually met every time you do a batch of manufacturing? Allied very closely with this is that your regulatory pathways can be very challenging. Often if you're first off the boat, then that produces unique challenges, both from a pharmaceutical perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective. And that's often because you don't conveniently fit into one part of an agency. You might straddle an agency that has both a device perspective as well as an API perspective. So the regulatory pathways can be very challenging and difficult, and you can find yourself having some quite complex engagements with regulators. And the final piece of what makes complex medicine development difficult is actual clinical testing. So how do you do things like blinding can be difficult if you've got complex forms or complex applications. And that then leads to, what are your arms going to look like? If you're doing formulation work with novel excipients, is that going to drive the need to have extra vehicle arms? How does your real genuine placebo or your comparators look like if they're not complex forms? So all of this complexity very much makes you believe, why bother? If it's so hard, why bother? And the answer is because complex medicines are sometimes the solution to the problem you're trying to face. So for example, novel APIs and combinations, they open up new modalities and new ways of getting into disease. You could have multiple multi-active medicines that are doing things like symptom relief, as well as tackling underlying causes of disease. You could be challenging difficult APIs, perhaps improving solubility of poorly soluble molecules, or protecting unstable molecules. So for example, in topical medicines, UV exposure, it could be a real issue to your stability of your medicine. So maybe a complex formulation can help you solve that problem. Or you can do, as in the case of the Pfizer vaccines, enhance intracellular uptake of molecules that would normally not get across lipid bilayers. You might think that there are opportunities to improve distribution, whether it be targeting distribution purely to the site of infection, for example, or the site of activity, or enhancing the distribution more generally. And new delivery modes through clever things like devices could offer you the opportunity for sustained delivery or on-the-demand delivery, and these could all be of huge benefit to patients. And finally, combinations offer you the chance to do rational choices of combinations up front. Of course, clinicians have always combined medicines, but this has often been done in the clinic with the patient in front of them, whereas here I'm talking about thinking about the reason for a combination up front and then driving your development based on that. And because of those new ways of thinking about medicines, that opens up the new commercial opportunities. So novel APIs and combinations, new targets, new classes, new approaches to old targets, formulation, repositioning, reuse, new dosing regimens, additional IP protection. When you've got very complex forms, it makes them difficult to copy. That can extend the lifetime of your drug, very commercial thought, but one that's often pays back some of the costs in development. Improved distribution, clearly you can improve safety and the benefit risk profile if you're targeting delivery. Likewise, you might be able to improve efficacy by getting higher concentrations where you need it. New delivery modes, better patient compliance. Better compliance can translate to better efficacy. That leads to improved benefit risk. And again, potential for additional IP protection. And then in combinations, of course, are all about improved efficacy for the patient. One of the biggest challenges that we've certainly faced, and I think faced a lot of us who are innovating in this space, is that it actually can be very difficult to judge whether the need for a complex medicine is met. And that's if you've spent many, many years working in developing complex forms, then you can feel you have the hammer that makes every problem look like a nail. And so it's one of the hardest parts that we've certainly found in making a judgment about the need for a complex medicine is really to understand that it all needs to be about the product. And the complex medicine needs to be the logical solution to the problem you're facing, not the one that just is interesting and exciting because that's what you've worked on. And again, there's a lot of thinking done in this space. This is all design-led thinking, as it's called, but it's all about really understanding what is the problem. Is it an efficacy problem? Well, that's one way of differentiating. Often that's the one we think about. But then there's safety, there's compliance, one that's not often thought about. The user experience. How often do we actually think about user experience from our drugs? In dermatology, it's actually really important. You know, if you're developing a new treatment for acne, a bright blue face paint is not going to get any traction on the market, regardless of how efficacious it is. You know, what about time to market, time to develop, cost to develop, route to market, all of these things. So that is understanding what is the problem you're trying to solve, and then understanding who cares about that problem. Often, again, rightly so, I think we think about patients and clinicians first, but it could be managers in a hospital, it could be the payers, it could be the regulators, it could be society overall. And so really you're trying to ask yourself the fundamental question, why should someone use this? And why is my product better? Why does your product go to 11? So very quick run through of a lot of different elements there. And really, I just want the take-home messages to be complex medicine in defining the commercial opportunity, as in with all commercial opportunities, it's about understanding the problem to be solved. And then the complex medicine needs to be the logical solution to the problem. So you need to say, why does this complex solution address the problem and avoid what I've always called the tap dancing cow? So in other words, taking a solution that's great for one thing and making it and adapting it to do something that it's really very terrible at. I've used that analogy for years and years, and then I just realized when I Googled that recently that Cadbury's have picked up my idea, and you can now find a video of tap dancing cows if you want to see that. And they are as ungainly as I imagine they would be. So the whole point is, though, you can adapt and think about your solution from a technical perspective and try and make it fit the problem, but you need to start with the problem and make your solution, or make it clear that that solution is the logical one. Is it evolution versus revolution? You know, is it really a step change or a completely different thing? And again, that has different consequences in your regulatory pathway, in how you move forward. So again, I would say that maybe, and certainly the strategy we've taken, is to really focus complexity into one space and not try and be complex across the piece. You have to recognize costs. I say may be higher, they will be higher. Development will be more complex. Certainly for the farm dev, the manufacturing side of things is going to be more complex, but your clinical development plan is going to be more challenging, and the regulatory route might be more difficult as well. And there may be implications for cost of goods. But balanced against all of that, as the opportunities can be substantial, and ultimately what this is about is producing differentiated, valuable solutions to patients and to healthcare professionals. So with that, I will stop, say thank you very much. hopefully, Sarah, I am exactly where you want me to be with time, and I'll open it up for any brief questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Dave. That's grand. We've got a couple of questions in. So the first one, so you're promoting a market pull approach, while with all the fancy new technologies in biotech, it's often a technology push as well. So how can we bring more focus earlier on in the process? Have you got any thoughts on that?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think the answer to that, and certainly, if you like, one of the reasons that Blueberry's a dermatology company, is you can start with technology and then ask the question of where does it fit best from an application perspective. So in other words, you do start with the tech, you do look at the technology and the opportunities, but then you look and say, well, actually, where is the best fit this is going to have from a medicines perspective? So for example, the technology we use is based on making new nanoformulations. It really doesn't fit the concept of systemic exposure at the moment, or to make it fit that concept would rely on us doing a whole bunch of development work about intracellular delivery, understanding exposures, whereas actually focusing on it from a topical perspective, we get the advantage of running the technology past the regulators, understanding it, understanding how to work with it, and producing, we hope, valuable medicines. But they're very much focusing on the strengths of the technology, where it's good at today out of the box, with the potential being something that we're going to leave till tomorrow. So it is a really excellent question. I very much, think that the industry needs to follow academia here. I think there's, great work going on in academic science and understanding new complex forms. And really, for us, it's then about looking to see how can we innovate around those sort of insights and make those potential solutions fit their best fit. I know I probably haven't quite answered the question in that much detail, but it's a really difficult one. It's one that certainly exercised myself and my colleagues over the years as to making sure we're trying to fit our solutions, and we did start with a solution to the best problems.
So another question here, are there problems about delivery of complex therapies in hospital?
Say again?
Are there also problems around the delivery of the complex therapies in hospital?
There can be, yes, it depends. In some ways, the bigger problems are delivering the complex medicine at home. Because of course, in hospital, you can have things like nebulizers, and you can also bring in patients to allow them to have access to very specific equipment. But yes, I think, especially if you're thinking about, for example, forms that may be complex but unstable. Again, I come back to the Pfizer vaccine, great example. You need to store it under very specialist conditions and use it very rapidly. But of course, the problem that was solving was quick to market, quick to the patient. But those sort of problems, yes, they do exist, and you have to recognize them as being problems. But I would say in a lot of ways, it may be that the hospital setting is not where the issues lie. It's the more outside of the more ability to have a controlled environment where you might be able to use complex equipment is going to be where some of the challenges lie in complex medicines.
Okay, so just before we go over to Dougal, I've just got one last question here. We've always believed that in small molecule drug discovery, we needed to really keep the discovery phase and development phase short to get as much from the patent life as we could. With these complex technologies, do we have any time left in patent life?
Yeah, that's an excellent question as well, Sarah. I think there are different patent opportunities opened up by complex forms, because the forms themselves can also be patentable. And also some of the advantages that are not in patent life, but are in making it, are in the fact that they are complex. So in other words, for a generic to come to market, say, for example, you had a nebulizer that was part of a combination device. In order to copy that product as a generic, you have to match all of the characteristics of the delivery device. And so that actually throws an awful lot of development work into the generic space that wouldn't necessarily be there. So yeah, so the patent question is always a difficult one. You know, I think patents are getting an awful lot of under the spotlight at the moment. Again, during the COVID pandemic, are they a good thing or a bad thing? From a biotech perspective, they're the thing that actually gives us lifeblood. Because if we didn't have patents and protectable matter, we wouldn't be able to actually raise capital. So they are an important part of our business. And keeping the patent life as long as possible is what you want to do. But we certainly take this approach of, call it like the onion approach, where you start with broad patents, and as you move through your development, as your complex medicine actually becomes better defined often, you can then put other layers of protection around that medicine until it becomes more and more specific each time. So I think complex medicines open up just a different way of thinking about how you might tackle the patent problem. And still have a patent estate and still have some life in your product, and a bit of exclusivity at the end that allows you to raise the capital to get there.
Excellent, thanks Dave.
Thanks Sarah.
To Dugu's talk now. We've got quite a lot of questions were coming in there for Dave, but I can see from the questions we will answer these through the course of the webinar series, so do stay tuned to get the answers. Thanks Dave.
Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Duygu Yılmaz. I'm a senior scientist at Medicines Discovery Catapult, and today I'm going to talk about target landscape in complex medicines. So drug discovery trends change over time. Here you see the distribution of different drug modalities in development over time. And as you can see from the plot, historically, small molecules dominate the space. But recently, this trend changed towards non-small molecule-based drugs, including proteins, polymers, nucleic acids, and mixtures, basically. For instance, in 2019, more than half of the new drugs in development were non-small molecule-based drugs. So I would like to start, what is the reason to this change? Why going beyond small molecules? One of the reasons is the progress in molecular biology and biotechnology. Here you see a simplified timeline where you see major milestones at the top panel and where you see the first approved drug modality using that technology at the bottom panel. For instance, with recombinant DNA technologies and antibody engineering technologies, it goes back to 1990s, but after only 10 years, it has been first antibody drug conjugate was approved in 2000s. And similarly, discovery of RNA interference mechanism goes back to 1998, but it required 20 years for the first siRNA to be approved in 2018. So it seems like there's a bit of a lag period between the discovery of the technology and the approval of the first drug product using that technology. In 2000s, there was a big advancement in the genomics. So firstly, the Human Genome Project was completed, and there were so many developments in the next generation sequencing, and that was followed up by discovery of gene editing technologies such as CRISPR-Cas9 and TALENs. So considering the lag period, which I just mentioned, you can imagine that there will be so many drug modalities approved in the upcoming years using these technologies. We already started seeing that. For instance, the first clinical trials of CRISPR-Cas started, first CAR-T therapy is approved in 2017. I already mentioned the siRNAs. And last year, as also Dave mentioned, first mRNA vaccine is approved in 2020. So you can imagine that this is just the beginning, and there will be many more complex medicines going to be approved by using these different technologies. All these advances in the molecular technology techniques enabled us, firstly, to understand the human disease and link this to the pathways and mechanisms involved in the human disease. And secondly, it also enabled us to develop a chemical toolbox, which we can go beyond the small molecules. So it enabled us to reach the targets which we couldn't interfere with small molecules before. And these modalities include antibody drug conjugates, drug peptide conjugates, and gene therapy by using different modalities such as microRNA, siRNA, saRNA, and also utilizing the gene editing technologies, as I mentioned. But all of these technologies and modalities are bigger than small molecules. So it also requires the development of drug delivery technologies in order to go to the active site to be effective. So in the recent years, there's a broad range of nanomedicines have been emerged. And this range from polymeric nanoparticles to inorganic nanoparticles or lipid-based nanoparticles. But in all of them, the goal is the same: to pass the biological barriers, deliver the novel chemical modality, and to enable the use of poorly soluble compounds, to increase the stability of the therapeutic moiety, and to deliver the highly toxic compounds to the target site while minimizing the side effects. Here you see a timeline of the development of nanomedicines. In green, dates show the first report of that technology, and in red, dates show the first FDA approval of that technology again. So what we noticed from this timeline is that most of the technologies goes back to really early times. For instance, if you look at the liposomes are one of the earliest drug delivery technologies. The report goes back to 1965. But the first approved liposomal-based drug delivery drug formulation was Doxil, and it was approved in 1995. It's a similar story with the polymeric nanoparticles and even with the lipid nanoparticles, which was used firstly in 2018 with the siRNA formulation, and very recently last year in the COVID vaccine, as Dave also mentioned. And here you see some examples of nanomedicines in the clinical practice today. Most of them are for oncology targets, and the idea here is to minimize the systemic toxic side effects of the active pharmaceutical ingredients. And in this one, for instance, Vyxeos, it was the combination of two very well-known chemotherapy drugs. And by the use of these two chemotherapy drugs in one formulation, it exceeded in the use of single drugs alone. And one of the other clinical area where nanoparticles have been made a big impact is the iron deficiency to treat the anemia. So in this formulation, this formulation addressed the toxicity issues associated with the use of free iron in the circulation. And in another application, liposomal-based drugs were approved to treat fungal infections. And in this one, again, the active pharmaceutical ingredient was too toxic to be used alone, but also this formulation helped to the solubility of the active pharmaceutical ingredient, because in physiological pH, the chemical was not soluble. So by using the liposomal technology, it enabled the use of this chemical, basically. And finally, the COVID vaccine, as we know, it enabled the use of mRNA. It was delivered fast to the market, and it protects the mRNA from the degradation by using the LNP formulation. So as you see, all the opportunities are there, but there are also a lot of challenges, as they've already mentioned. As their name implied, complex medicines consist of more than one chemical entity. Therefore, determining the pharmaceutical properties of these medicines are more challenging compared to small molecules. In principle, there are 5 steps required for these medicines to be effective. Firstly, they need to be circulated long enough in the bloodstream to be able to reach the target organ. And afterwards, they need to accumulate in the target organ and to be able to penetrate the target tissue. And finally, they need to be internalized by the target cells in order to release the active pharmaceutical ingredient. So tracking each of these processes from systemic level to subcellular level becomes really important in characterization of complex medicines. And imaging offers a huge potential in this characterization. At MDC, we use PETs and near-infrared imaging and mass spectrometry imaging to assess circulation, accumulation, and penetration of complex medicines. And we employ immunofluorescence imaging and mass spectrometry techniques to assess internalization and drug release. With the help of in vivo imaging, one can look at the biodistribution, organ and tumor accumulation of the complex medicines. And by looking at the ex vivo tissue in more detailed analysis, for instance, with microscopy, we can look at the internalization and the cellular trafficking and comment on the efficacy of the complex medicines. Here is an example of a workflow where we look at the nanoparticles, tumor accumulation and biodistribution of gold nanoparticles. Here we use the dual tumor implant SW480 and A549 xenomorph mouse model, and we tested different size of gold nanoparticles and different modifications on the gold nanoparticles. So gold nanoparticles were labeled by a near-infrared dye, size 7, and administered to the mice, and in vivo biodistribution was assessed by using the IVIS system. And after the study, the organs were collected and the accumulation of the gold nanoparticles were quantified in different organs as well as different tumors. So at the end of this study, the optimum size of the gold nanoparticle and the optimum modification could be determined to take forward. And after this, we also collected the tissue, tumor tissue and obtained sections from the tumor tissue in order to analyze it with high resolution microscopy. At the top panel here, you see the gold nanoparticles in red and the cell nuclei in blue. So we could verify the delivery of gold nanoparticles in the tumor at the subcellular level. And at the bottom, we also additionally stained this section for a vascularization marker, CD31. And we saw that this, which is shown is in green here, the vascularization was around the gold nanoparticle area, which suggests that it was important in the delivery of the gold nanoparticles in the tissue. So you can imagine that this kind of workflow can really help us to characterize the characterize the complex medicines and determine the most promising candidates to take forward in the development of complex medicines. With that brings me to the end of my presentation. I just would like to emphasize one more that advances in the genomics era drive the diversification of drug targets. And with small molecules, we could only target a small percentage of human proteins, but with the molecular biology techniques and drug delivery technologies enable us to go beyond small molecule approaches. However, there are certain challenges associated with more complex modalities, and in-depth characterization is required in order to increase the success rate in the clinics. So you will hear more examples of these kind of complex medicines and characterization methods in the upcoming seminars. Thank you very much for your attention. I can take any questions.
Excellent, thank you, Diogo. That was brilliant. Lots of questions here. Can people please put their questions into the Q&A box for Diogo? I've got one at the moment. So you mentioned on a couple of slides there's quite a long lag period between the development of a technology and then its application in the clinic. Do you have any thoughts on what might cause that?
I think one of the most important reasons is the challenges associated with the development of these technologies in order to make the drug product. That's why I think it's taking more time to get an approved product. But I also think that now it's getting more easier because there are more examples to show certain things in different modalities. So it can get also a bit easier after certain advancements.
Okay, thank you. We haven't got any more questions for Diogo, so we shall move on. I was just checking, sorry, Diogo, I was just checking the scroll down far enough. Thank you very much for that. So over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm just getting my slides up now. Hopefully you can see these.
We can. Can you put them onto full screen as well? Thanks.
So what I thought I would do in this presentation is begin to explore, what you've heard is the opportunity and the potential and the start of what is potentially the next wave of medicines. But what are the steps that could be taken then to make the UK in particular be at the forefront of this new technology? So I'm coming at this from a Catapult perspective, and you'll see in these slides reference to a couple of different catapults. So we're coming at this as a not-for-profit centre who's tasked by the UK government to help medicines discovery innovators be successful. And this is, a nice position to be in. We're a not-for-profit centre. We are literally here to help. So we've been going from a standing start and growing very rapidly over the last 4 years. And one of the things that's been striking on that journey is, we've had already 17 different collaborators in the UK with complex medicines projects. And those range from large-scale companies through to very early-stage academic collaborators. But it's really made us aware of the great deal of interest and expertise and potential this country has in this technology. So, what is the potential here? I think there's a lot that this field could grow into. And I think, we don't need to belabor the point that people thought lipid nanoparticles were going to be really challenging to commercialize, but nobody thinks that anymore. We've seen with Moderna and BioNTech that actually, yes, they're inconvenient, but they're also incredibly powerful. And a lot of the arguments people would have of can we commercialize products like lipid nanoparticles have gone away. And but there's many other types of complex medicine which is still a work in progress. But when you look at the potential growth in the market for areas like ADCs or oligonucleotides, which have the potential to explode as commercial areas, and looking at some of the more recent deals that have been done in this sector, which are large-scale opportunities whereby pharmaceutical companies are now investing in and buying these candidates either at the clinical stage or at the much earlier stage, because they're seeing the potential of the technology and they're seeing the potential of the drug candidates to really move us forward from where we are with that traditional first wave of small molecules and second wave of antibodies, seeing this as the next wave of medicines, not just in theory, but now increasingly in practice. So one of the things we've done is really to stop and think about the field. And I'm showing you here a picture of a report which we'll be launching alongside this series of webinars and seminars. And we will give you the chance to read this report in full. What I'm going to do today is show you some of the early findings and highlights to provoke thought, really. So this is a burgeoning field. There's a few companies internationally already making great profits, and obviously BioNTech's future is transformed in the last 12 months. And we know from the collaborations we've been doing in the UK what great ideas there are in academia and in SMEs and CROs in the UK. So how could we galvanize growth in this sector? So what we've done is work with another part of the Catapult network, the Centre for Process Innovation, which is part of High Value Manufacturing Catapult. And we've both gone out and done with a survey and a range of conversations with UK innovators in the field. Because the role of the Catapult is to help, we want to know, well, what's already working well and what's not working well? What are the problems that, if we could overcome them, would really help the UK complex medicine sector to grow and thrive and be an international leader? Because these are things that we may or may not be able to help. We can certainly begin to galvanize some solutions to knotty problems. So here's a first set of findings that we have in this space. So firstly, we need biological assays and biological characterization. And Dugu's already elegantly shown you some of that, some of the potential for answering those questions in creative ways that really get to the heart of the problem. So that's about imaging in preclinical animals and preclinical cell models, and also about novel bioanalytical methods and validation assays. And what this gets at is you cannot have necessarily always generic solutions for every complex medicine. They're not all the same. And what innovators who have some expertise need is support and collaborators to answer some of these knotty biological questions that they're going to be asked by an investor or pharma company or by a regulator. And that brings us into another part of the findings in the survey is most people are crying out for support for collaborative science, support for technology partnerships, access to novel technical expertise. So in previous surveys, we've shown that something like 40% of SMEs in the UK have less than 5 individuals. So when you have really difficult and challenging projects like this, it's unlikely that any one company has all of the technical expertise that is needed to take this to the clinic. And it is important that we try and find ways of putting together the different parts of that UK infrastructure to make the journey towards the clinic more straightforward and easier. I'm showing you a snapshot on the bottom of a many authored collaboration that we were involved in with a number of northern universities, us all combining our expertise to help to characterize a microbubble technology in cancer. This sort of study couldn't be done by any one of those organizations in isolation. Another finding, which is, if I'm honest, not amazingly surprising, is the innovators in complex medicines are crying out for government investment, government support, national coordination of an infrastructure and a support network. This includes investment and funding in some of the fundamental drug delivery technologies and novel modalities research projects, so that we can continue to keep the UK at the forefront of this growth area. And another part of that sometimes gets left behind is many people coming into the drug discovery field, leaving universities, won't have heard about complex medicines. It won't be on their curriculum, either in their degree or their PhD. So if we want people to come in and really hit the ground running in complex medicines, whether that's in chemistry or in formulation or in biological characterizations or in manufacturing development, we need to upskill that next generation and think about where are people going to get the training, both to lead these SMEs, but also to do the biology and the characterization in the SMEs, have the scientific credibility and the industrial rigor that's going to be needed to grow SMEs rapidly in this space. And another thing that is a very much of an emergent property of all the conversations we've done in this space is the need for guidance, what people often characterize as a roadmap. So how do you go from what you have, which is often a novel technology or a novel molecule or a novel modality, which has taken 10 years of painstaking research to get there? How do you go from that to having a clinically ready drug candidate? And there's a huge amount of guidance and practical support that is needed to get there, from the technology characterization, validation and industrialization, through the early preclinical research journey, through the regulatory approval, and Dave's already spoken about, because these are often first-in-class challenges, it isn't always obvious either for the innovator or indeed for the regulator the exact package that's needed to take this forward. And then the design of clinical trials in this space is also often needing to be bespoke. So the support network and the roadmap are things that would make it easier for innovators to be confident they can take their product further towards the clinic. And if they're successful in getting that far, there's also a need for support around improved delivery technologies and improved manufacturing. So I guess all of us are much more familiar with the delivery challenges of lipid nanoparticles than we were 12 months ago. They are clearly advanced and working, but are probably not the optimal choice for all drug substances. And they have these well-characterized limiting factors around cold chain and storage. But could we solve those problems? Is there ways of looking at lipid nanoparticles and the broader nanoparticle space to understand how product composition could be altered to improve physicochemical properties and stability and delivery and performance? And you could imagine a whole significant research program that could really make these technologies more readily accessible for industrialization. And then what could we do around scalable manufacturing? It is no particular secret that one of the barriers to scaling up vaccine access has been having plants that can genuinely manufacture these to quality and to scale. So what could we do around the early stages of manufacturing, around early scale up, to help innovators be confident that their new technology can be manufactured at scale, to help investors to see the potential? And that's about having people with expertise in GMP facilities who really also understand complex medicines characteristics. So there's a lot that one could imagine doing in that space. So it's a significant challenge. I think it's a really interesting set of data, and we're still mulling it over, but I've put on a few bullet points of things that the UK could do to respond to both the challenges and the opportunities in this space. So you could imagine this national laboratory infrastructure that companies can come to and get support, either to dip in and out of it as they need, or to follow that journey all the way through preclinical assessment, process development, scale up and manufacture, to make it easier for innovators to succeed. With lipid nanoparticles in particular, you can imagine connecting together the UK capabilities to think about how can we be at the forefront of this technology that's clearly got clinical success and clinical potential. And to genericize that, can we develop this roadmap that complex medicines innovators can use to take them through the journey, that drug development experts, clinical trial design, regulatory affairs experts can all bring their expertise to bear and really help the innovators to understand what is needed at the different stages. How can we simplify this journey? And of course, if we're going to grow, it's going to need investment, both public sector investment, private sector investment. Is it possible to target this sector with bespoke support to innovate, to validate, to translate, to give investors the confidence that the package of data is going to be at a stage that it's actually investable? And as I've said already, much of this is going to be needed as team science. Okay, I think the days of any one company going the whole journey by themselves are long gone in drug discovery. I've spent most of the last 10 years putting together open innovation collaborations. And this is an area why this is particularly relevant for. So could the UK create a portal that brings together the different expertise and needs and skills of the UK and makes it more facile to find the partner that people need to take their product forward? Because we have pieces of the solution all over the patch. We have expertise in delivery technologies. We have understanding of drug repositioning opportunities and disease expertise. We have expertise in biological manufacturing and in biological characterization. Can we bring these together and make it easier for one person to find a partner? And can we think about the skills, the training, and the knowledge exchange that helps the next generation to see complex medicines as what it is, a field of enormous potential, but also enormous challenge. And the upside about coming into a field of enormous challenge is there are still problems to solve. There's innovation to be done, and there's progress to be made. And we want to think about how do we inspire the UK's next generation of biological scientists, of chemistry scientists, of pharm dev scientists to see this as a field that they want to get into. So that's a lot to think about, and I would love to be able to say I can turn the tap on all of those solutions. That is significantly beyond my power. What can we do? Well, the first thing is we will be sharing this report both with people who are interested from this webinar series, but also more broadly to help the field, both in complex medicines and those who are interested in investment, to understand the needs and the opportunities and some of these ideas around things that could be done. And in terms of connecting the field together, I'm hoping that this seminar series, through some way at least, helping the community around the UK and internationally to see that it's all connected, whether it's people in universities or SMEs or CROs, pharma or Catapults. This is the sort of common problem that people of different training and different backgrounds can tackle together. I'm showing here on the right a graphic of showing some of the ways that catapults can get involved. Both the medicines discovery catapult can get involved around helping the bioanalysis and characterizations in cells and tissues and in vivo, and can help around translation using our characteristics in spatial transcriptomics and clinical biomarker design. So we have lots of capabilities that are relevant here. And our partner catapults, for example, CPI, can bring a lot of expertise around medicines manufacturing, innovation and development and commercialization. So there is parts of that UK landscape already in place, already working together. We need more bits of the UK infrastructure to work together. So we can think about how to pilot alliances and help innovators build investable propositions, because it is within our remit to do that. And maybe what we can do emerging from this sort of building of a community is to create a more effective and coherent voice, to speak to venture capital and investments and research councils as well, to ensure that this is seen as a field that the UK should be seeing as a top priority. One thing I wanted just to briefly highlight that we are already doing is Strength in Places. Some of you will have heard of this program, and there are a number of Strength in Places projects already underway around the UK. We won seed corn funding in the Wave 2 to try and put together a proposition for the Northwest, centered around Cheshire and Warrington, around how could we transform productivity in complex medicines. As we've seen in the last 3 talks, that is not a trivial problem to solve. We have put together a proposition as to how you could do this by having a multifaceted approach to this complex problem, supporting innovation, business growth, skills development, access to complex characterization facilities, business support and accelerators, and then building regional and national collaborators. Now, I don't know if we will get the funding for this, but we have galvanized the community, brought the community together regionally, and hopefully built a proposition that is investable. We've also published a report, which is already on our website, around some of the definitions around complex medicines to provoke people's thoughts around what are we actually talking about, and what roles can we all play in driving the field forward. So there's a lot to be done and a lot that we're doing. Hopefully the report that's already on our website and the report that's coming out allied to this webinar hopefully is interesting food for thought. Hopefully some of the ideas around what the field needs to do will get your support or your challenge, and hopefully we can all work together to try and find solutions to these naughty but actually quite exciting problems. And obviously my thanks to my colleagues on here, both within MDC and CPI, and the range of partners who are in Strength in Places have all contributed thoughts to these slides and ideas. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Peter. So we've got a few coming in. We've got someone here that seems pleased to see you again, Peter, and is asking, are you aiming to work on innovative products only, or also on complex generics and similars?
It's a good question. I mean, we're here to help is the trivial question. So if there's a UK innovator, and innovation can be defined quite broadly, so come and talk to us would be the honest answer. We're happy to have a conversation. If we can't help, I'm sure we can help to find somebody who can.
And another question here. So are there any learnings from advanced therapies, such as gene therapies, that would be useful both in terms of building capacity and capability and in terms of understanding the translational challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they are, and I don't want to pretend I'm an expert in ATMPs. It is interesting if you look at some of the regional hubs that have been created for ATMPs, and I think there's 3 regional hubs around the UK that our sister cell and gene therapy Catapult have been involved in organising, and I think they coalesce some of the challenges and the NHS and business and industry coming together to solve the problem. So I think the sense that it's a multifaceted approach to complex problems that requires long-term investment and collaboration, I'm sure that principle applies here too.
And fine, we've got another one here. Where do computational approaches and disciplines fit? Does the UK have any emphasis on computational biomedicine, or is the focus only or mostly on biomed?
I mean, I think the UK has got a lot of expertise in computational skills. Quite how it fits in here, there's lots of places that can fit in here around thinking about the targets that might be amenable to the sort of drug repositioning challenges, thinking about the modeling skills that could be done to understand what changes are likely to work, whether that's in lipid nanoparticle composition or in the pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic modeling. Loads of places for people with computational skills to fit in. As I say, nearly every skill we have in the industry is relevant here and can be brought together. And certainly that sort of AI and computational approach should be at the heart of it, because testing these things is incredibly expensive and time consuming.
Okay. I think that we're, just got another one in here. That's quite an interesting one. So ADCs are a good example of the technology bottlenecks in clinical studies. So early conjugation technologies are blocking capacity in clinical trials, with generation 2 and 3 ADCs have the potential to solve these issues. Actually, where does the question go? Sorry. What can we do to address the bottlenecks in clinical studies from the earlier complex meds?
I mean, I don't think I'm the best person to answer that question. I think it's one of the many knotty problems I think you could come up with it in this field. Capacity is one of the opportunities here. How can we actually increase our capacity? How can we run slightly more complex and innovative clinical trial designs? And that's the best I can probably offer to that slightly challenging problem.
Yeah, okay. And we've got quite a few questions again, as we had earlier, that I think we will be addressing as this series goes on. So we will leave those for today, and I hope that you come back to see these questions answered in the series. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Peter and Dougal and Dave for their talks today, and introduce, if I share my screen, the talks for next week. So next week we're going to start with the molecule. I'll just move this out of the way. We'll start with the molecule and how we select it and how we characterize it. And so we're going to hear from 3 speakers again. We have Tilly Bingham, who's a VP of Science at Concept Life Sciences, and Tilly will be taking us through developing the assay cascade for complex medicines. Then we'll be hearing from Rebecca Thompson, who's Head of Faculty and Deputy Director of the Asprey Biostructure Laboratory at Leeds. And Rebecca will be talking about using cryo-EM in the characterization and quality control of complex medicines. And finally, we will have Jamie Tchaikovsky, again from Medicines Discovery Catapult, who's doing a postdoc with us. And he will be talking about cellular internalization and trafficking of complex medicines. So thanks again for the speakers today for an excellent sort of kick-off to the series, and we'll see you all again next week. Thank you very much.